Hello, everybody. This is Rick Woodin, Chief Scientist at Zeo Skin Health. We hope this finds you all safe and sound today. Really excited to be with you all to discuss our Zeo Skin Health anti-aging solutions, a portfolio of advanced technologies and products for treating different kinds of skin aging conditions. I hope you find this informative, and I really look forward to sharing a very robust amount of information with you about the products and how they can be used in combination to treat varying skin conditions, as well as concomitantly with different type of services and procedures that you may conduct in your clinics. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition over to the information I'd like to share with you, and I hope you find it enjoyable. I'll check back with you at the end. So today in our advanced training module, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss a series of products. But what I'd like to do first is to overview a general basis behind our innovation principles that really differentiates Zeo Skin Health in the aesthetic space. And this is based on multiple decades of research by Dr. Zainal Baji, who has found that the preferred method of treating skin is through two different principles, one being stimulation and one being stabilization. Stimulation is based on the idea that it's better root and biological pathways to stimulate the skin's natural restorative, regenerative, and reparative processes. Whereas the stabilization principle is taking biological processes that are out of control or hyperactive, if you will, and bringing them to a point of stasis. A very good example of this would be out-of-control melanogenesis because of hyperactive melanocyte activity that results in dyspigmentation conditions. So that type of situation requires a stabilization approach to downregulate that melanocyte activity and bring the skin back to a static condition at the cellular level to manage different type of pigmentation conditions. The first anti-aging solution I'd like to share with you today is our most recent advanced breakthrough in restoring skin structure, shape, and contour. This is our firming serum, which was designed to visibly tighten and lift the skin to reverse sagging skin for a more defined facial contour. This was really based off input that we received that we're constantly accessing worldwide from skin professionals, plastic surgeons, and dermatologists who had asked us why we didn't have a solution for that kind of a condition that will commonly require different kinds of therapies for tightening and lifting the skin all the way through things like surgical facelifts. And is it possible for us to be able to restore the skin back to a condition where we can reverse that sagging skin and redefine the facial contour that's been lost? So this was a culmination of 8 years of research, as it was very difficult for us to be able to crack the code of how to achieve that. And of course, as a company, we don't bring things to market until we've definitively proven through clinical modeling that we've been able to achieve that and have the technology to enable the biological pathways through the stimulation principle to achieve such. So this bioactive formula was designed to support the repair and retention of the skin's structural integrity by stimulating those natural regenerative processes, primarily targeting laxity and sagging, which differentiates it, as you see with the information I'm going to follow, with in our Zeo anti-aging category. You could also recommend this product readily for use on neck and décolleté because it's an ultra-mild formulation, and those areas tend to be more sensitive to aggressive treatments. And we also know that the sagging in the neck and the décolleté and the crepiness you see there is very consistent with the biological issue that we're going to discuss here in a moment. One of the key technologies that really enabled our ability to crack the code on sagging skin and loss of facial contour really arose 3 decades ago in Russia as an outcome of treating people at the epicenter and the peripheral region of Chernobyl after the terrible Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Russian scientists, like many other well-developed countries, have extensive government resources in research that are constantly looking for medical treatment to address certain kind of disease conditions. And one of the technologies that the Russian government had in their cache was a sodium DNA that's harvested actually from a fish source of male sturgeons. The technology basically was deployed as an oral treatment to try and prevent the onset of various diseases that can be related to ionizing radiation due to the Chernobyl disaster, as I said. One of those central technologies was a deoxyribonucleic acid, as I said, mass harvested from male sturgeons. And what was an unexpected outcome, although they saw great results with being able to prevent the onset of various internal diseases that can occur from extensive exposure to ionizing radiation, they also noticed this compound happened to repair gamma radiation-induced skin lesions very rapidly. And this was a piece of information that sort of sat in the files in the cache for a long time, as it wasn't central to what the Russian government's researchers were really addressing. But years later, an Italian biotechnology company had actually approached the Russian government about licensing a completely different technology than this, and in the course of those discussions and exchanges, stumbled across this information and asked if there was accessibility for licensing that as well, and the answer was yes. And then they took this sodium DNA technology into human clinical trials subsequently and proved efficacy in treating different types of age-related conditions. The mechanism of action of how the sodium DNA functions is actually fragments of sodium DNA can penetrate to living cells by pinocytosis. This is illustrated in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, where it shows how certain chemical compounds or molecules can enter into the cell to stimulate natural biological activity. The sodium DNA is based on nucleotides that are included in the sodium DNA complex, which serves as a structural basis for the synthesis of nucleic acids and the cofactors inside the cell's cytoplasm. Once the technology is delivered into the cells through that pinocytotic pathway, it can then upregulate and activate the adenosine A2 receptor. This results in fibroblast proliferation, meaning that it's not necessarily triggering the fibroblasts to produce more material for skin tissue matrix product restoration. It's causing those fibroblasts to proliferate so you have more fibroblasts to produce more fibrous material for that restorative pathway to take place. The next slide we've been talking here about is the anchoring fibril structure. This was really the root of the issue and the code that we needed to crack to be able to restructure the skin scaffolding, if you will. And I tend to use an analogy that seems to resonate with most who have talked to about this, of a simple suspension bridge that you would see anywhere in the world that goes over a river or the road, for example. And you really, if you look closely at a suspension bridge, it really has three key components, and they're similarly illustrated here in the epidermal dermal junction. And what you see here is you see a very dark black horizontal component, and that is one of a three-part system of the anchoring fibril. And the analogy I would draw to that is, if you were underneath that suspension bridge looking upward, you would notice a bunch of horizontal iron plates or different kind of metal plates, which basically the road that we travel on is placed on top of. But those iron or metal plates need to be suspended by something. And those suspensions are typically the huge concrete pylons one sees that go vertical and attach up underneath that horizontal plate to keep it elevated. But those pillars then also have to be cemented or anchored somehow in the ground or in the base of the river through additional concrete pylons at the base of them to hold them structurally sound. Sometimes you're even attached to the bedrock of the riverbed or the bedrock in the ground beneath that bridge. So really what you have to do is you have to be able to restructure all three of these very different components if you're going to restore the anchoring fibril system in a way that it's going to return skin to an improved facial contour and better structural integrity. The challenge that resides in this is that each of these three elements are based on very different fiber systems that are responsible for the construction. So instead of iron plates or different metals or concrete being used as the structural material, in the skin, what we have in the horizontal plate where those metal plates would be in the dark black section is something known as oxydolan fibers. These are predominantly composed of fibrillin-1 that strand together to make that horizontal section of the anchoring fibril bridge, if you will, back to our analogy. But those vertical pillars are based on something very different. Those are composed of laminin-5, collagen-7, and fibronectin that wind themselves together to form those vertical pillars. But then the basement cement you see at the bottom of the picture holding those vertical pillars in place is that bedrock or that concrete at the base of it, and that is the collagen and elastin that our fibroblasts produce. Now, if you can find technology can induce the pathways to regenerate all of those different fiber systems, you could, in theory, restore the anchoring fibril system. This is what we endeavored to do for many years, but could not find the technology to enable all of those different areas of restructuring. So when we talk about the anchoring fibril system, the first part we have to look at is those iron plates, the horizontal black section we saw in the prior image. And this resides in the papillary dermis, where a critical zone due to its role in cohesion and biomechanical properties of skin. It's unfortunately also a primary site of dermal aging. And what happens is those oxydolan fibers, even as early as age 30, start to gradually disappear in the dermal epidermal junction until actually none remain. And with age, expression of the collagens by the papillary fibroblasts is also impaired. So consequently, as skin loses structure and its elasticity, it begins to collapse and sag, no different than suspension bridge that isn't maintained properly and begins to degrade because of corrosion of the metals, whatever the case, the cracking of the concrete structure. And unfortunately, we've all heard on the news in years past disastrous situations where bridges have actually collapsed while humans were traveling on them and resulted in disastrous situations. So the next technology that we had to address this is a yellow sweet clover isolate that comes from a Mediterranean region, a very specific region. And it is not known for certain, but it's been hypothesized that the reason it's so bioactive is because of the uptake of the plant from the soil condition in that particular region. And what it's been shown capable of doing is actually inducing the production of the fibrillins that are the major components of those oxydolan microfibrils we talked about earlier. And as we are exposed to the sun over our lifetime, photoaging is one of the characterizations of large accumulations of non-functional elastic fibers that form amorphic masses in the dermis. So this is one component of that degradation pathway I was referring to a moment ago. And as skin becomes chronically photoexposed over that lifetime, significant reductions in the fibrillin-1 messenger RNA that signals for more production of that material begins to suppress. And so at the level of the DEJ, the microfibrils of the fibrillin that they're made of become lessened and shortened. And therefore you start seeing the loss of integrity and functionality of those fibrillin microfibril system, which is responsible for the disorganization of the elastic network in photoexposed and intrinsically aged skin. And the result that we see outwardly is sagging, particularly in the jawline area, the cheek area near the nasolabial fold, As that structural integrity becomes impaired, Newtonian forces of gravity take over, and the skin begins to sag, and then you also can get some coarse wrinkling from that sagging manifestation. So what we have now is in this isolate, because of the soil content, as they believe, it's particularly rich, very rich in very low molecular weight, 320 to 460 Daltons, Daltons being the measure of molecular weights in chemistry, no different than we're measured in our weight as humans in pounds or kilos. And the technology being that small, and it was a similar situation with sodium DNA, to digress for a minute, will readily penetrate into the skin, and they have stimulating glucans and fructans, which are those low molecular weight bioactive constituents that come through this isolate that can readily biodeliver deeper into the skin to the DEJ to induce more fibrillin-1 synthesis. And as you can see, the testing at 1% on the human fibroblast led to an 18% increase in that synthesis rate. But it was also tested on aged human fibroblasts, and it restored them to a comparative level as normal fibroblasts. Tested on mature skin explants also limited the degradation of acetyl fibers. So this is actually a combination of stimulation and stabilization that's occurring here. So you want to stimulate that fibrillin synthesis, but then you also want to maintain the longevity of what you just stimulated so that the condition of recontouring the face and improving its structural integrity will be a retained phenomenon. So maintaining the functional organization of the oxydolan fiber network will help preserve the mesh structure of the papillary dermis to help guide those tightening effects and mitigate the sagging and wrinkles. So what we have now, before I go further, is the sodium DNA is really affecting that base cement or the bedrock. So we've attacked one of the three components of the anchoring fibril system. This sweet clover isolate is part of our Z-Core exclusive technology. So we are the only ones that have this worldwide, this specific material. And we can now address the second part, which is the horizontal plates at the top of the bridge structure. But what we haven't addressed yet, and the reason why it took us so many years to crack the code on this, was we needed a third technology that we were finally able to identify, which is again a very low molecular weight biomimetic peptide. And this technology specifically boosts the production of the DEJ structural components of collagen 7, laminin 5, and fibronectin, the exact three primary components of the vertical pillars of the skin's anchoring fibril system for restoration and maintenance of the DEJ integrity. So now when you use this in combination with the sodium DNA and the sweet clover isolate, which is bioactive fructans and glucans, you can holistically address the anchoring fibril system, something we've never seen done in the aesthetics topical skincare category to date. So the data that supported this was that in ex vivo testing on human skin implants, both the laminin 5, the fibronectin, and the collagen 7, as you can see, were all appreciably increased in their production rates. So we took these and combined them into an advanced biodelivery system. And specifically what we did here is, if you look at the image on the far left-hand side of the slide, you see this self-assembled microgel network structure. They're many times also referred to as hydrogel systems, sometimes also referred to as multilamellar gel systems. And that final term I used is really relevant to the description I'll give, because if you look at this gel network under something like a very high-powered electron microscope, et cetera, it would look to the eye as if it was bed sheets that were layered with clear material trapped in between those layers. And what that really is the self-assembled microgel network. And what that you're seeing in that electron microscopy visual is moisture compacted in between polymeric strands that look like the bed sheets. And the reason that's important is because if anybody were to do desktop research on this, you would find that, and it's very commonly known among skin professionals, that moist, hydrated skin will receive materials much quicker than dry skin you can. And the beauty of the self-assembled microgel network systems is that they flash hydrate the skin. So as soon as you apply this product, something on the surface of the skin, and you begin applying shear force through the application process, you'll know it very quickly breaks. You'll feel a very flash, light cooling effect, which is all that moisture releasing and hydrating the stratum corneum and very upper level of the epidermis, now preparing it immediately to receive the maximal amount of those 3 bioactive constituents we just talked about earlier. But one of the hidden beauties of that as well is it'll quickly dry down. So many people that have the product experience will say, when I first put it on, it feels slightly tacky, only for a matter of 10, 15, maybe 20 seconds, and then that dissipates. And that's because those bed sheets or that polymeric system has now cured on the skin to put almost like a semi-occlusive effect that allows the skin to readily breathe, but also traps through bioadhesion those active constituents on the surface of the skin to further drive the transepidermal penetration to the DEJ, to drive those bioactive constituents down into the cellular level where that penocytosis can take place with the sodium DNA, and the fructans, glucans, and the biomimetic peptide can start inducing the pathways necessary to drive all of that fibril production to restore those degraded anchoring fibril systems. So this was all theory, and what is really the most important is what do the results, meaning the clinical study results and outcomes, definitively show. So all of our clinical studies are done by third-party independents, and in this case, our protocol was specifically designed to be very clear in delineating what the firming serum and the firming serum itself could do. And I say that because when you look at the protocol, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you don't convolute the concomitant use in the clinical study. We offer a lot of protocols of concomitant use at Zeo Skin Health because they enhance the overall benefit profile by doing so. They also can be modified and modulated based on any practitioner's need for a specific patient, because every patient is different in what their need basis is and the severity or lack of their condition. But in the case of your clinical studies, you'd prefer to do that in a way where you get the cleanest read on the product in question. So in this case, we were looking at addressing sagging skin, the deep coarse wrinkling that goes along with it, redefining the facial contour. So we would only want to have one bioactive formulation in the study and nothing else to interfere with that or add to that benefit, which would then question the outcome of what did the firming serum by itself do. So in this case, we have a gentle cleanser because you always want to clean the skin, have it prepared to receive the treatment, make sure there's no excess sebum there, et cetera, to interfere. And then you have the broad spectrum sunscreen, which of course is an ethical part of any clinical study that's done over a period of many weeks. But we know that a gentle cleanser and a sunscreen and primer, for example, is not designed to have firming, sagging impact on the skin benefits in any way or any technology related to doing so. So therefore, you know by this combination protocol, and it's very simplified, that you're truly reading the benefit of the firming serum itself. So this product is indicated for based on the panelist selection we brought into this clinical study design, which is only moderate and severe patients, or panelists in this case, who were exhibiting specific signs of skin laxity, loss of elasticity, the deep wrinkle formation because of that skin laxity, and the sagging and loss of contour. And to the right, we really give a summation of the results, and this will be germane to all the clinical experience studies that we talk about throughout the rest of this presentation. Is we always want to look at three primary things. The three primary things that we want to look at from a metrics standpoint is instrumental measures. Instruments will read what they read. They don't lie. They're only going to report what they see. Clinical graders do this every day. It's their profession. They see thousands and thousands of patients per month with different conditions. They're very well trained to look at differences and measure those differences. And then third is the self-assessment of the patient themselves, or the panelist in this case, because if the clinician, because of their highly trained eye, can see it, and an instrument that's highly detectable can pick up differences, that doesn't guarantee that the skin professional's patient at the end of the day is going to see the same results. And that's absolutely critical for patient appeal and satisfaction, repeat purchase. So what we've done here is provide an overall summation of what we found throughout the course of the study, where we measured firmness through a cutometer instrument, saw 100% of subjects noticed a substantial improvement in that measure. In the case of sagging, the clinicians, graders, clearly noticed a very significant difference, approaching 90% of subjects seeing improvement in that issue. Elasticity was dramatically improved, almost to the tune as well of the 90%, again through an instrumental measure. And the self-assessment showed over 90% of appeal in their overall skin health. So here's where we always say we want to check all the boxes when we run our clinical studies to make sure that all of those metrics are showing consistency, and you can see from these bar graphs that they do, and that gives you really irrefutable evidence and the ultimate confidence the product will do what we promised it will do. So here is some of the illustrations you can see where when we look at firmness, what you're really doing by restructuring the anchor fibril system is pulling back that skin, tightening that skin, lifting it back to reduce that sagging. A great example would be the two images to the right on the top row, where you have a subject at baseline and then at 12 weeks, and you can see those deep furrows in the jowl area, and you can see the sagging in the jowl area that's now been lifted and pulled back to reduce those deep crevices and refine the contour of the skin. You see the same thing again in the pictures below, in that row from left to right, where you have baseline and 12 weeks, and you've got a very good demonstration of the pullback of the jowl area and the very significant diminishment, in some cases, the total elimination of some of those deep crevices that's caused by those Newtonian forces and that sagging phenomena. 97% of subjects showing improvement in this area. Sagging, similar phenomena. You want to look again at that definition that's been restored, that reduction of those deep crevices in the jowl area, and basically a refinement in the contour of the jawline. And you see this very significantly with the furrow reductions in the top row of baseline 12 weeks on this different panelist, and then the row below, you definitely see where in that jowl area it's been pulled up and back from the anchoring fibril restructuring to give it better contour and shape. So here we saw 93% of subjects with significant improvement in the mid-face and jawline skin sagging by week 12. Elasticity is a key indicator as well of the biological pathways of restoring that anchoring fibril system, as we mentioned earlier, because it is a key part of the cement that holds that bridge together. And the measurement by cutometer, which is basically the global standard for looking at firmness and elasticity, showed very dramatic improvements, 88% to be exact, by 12 weeks. But what's also interesting about the illustration that you'll see in the graph below is you'll see that there was a measurable difference at 2 weeks that dramatically continued to improve up to 12 weeks. And we call this our progressional analysis. We always like to look at our data to see what happens at 2, 4, 8, 12 weeks, sometimes onward, to see if there's a continual progression of improvement. As you can see, this graph illustrates clearly that that occurred here. I'm going to transition for a moment to our growth factor serum. Here's a product that was designed for something very, very different biological targeting, very different pathways of induction through the stimulation principle to specifically increase skin density and smooth expression lines. So we know from skin practitioners that one of the very different conditions besides sagging and loss of facial contour and shape is that you get a hollowness in the skin. You see this a lot in the cheek area particularly, and it can happen in other areas as well of the face, but that's where you predominantly see that. And our growth factor serum was really about redensifying the skin. So building that structure beneath, not the anchoring fibril scaffolding system, but really the amount of collagen, elastin, and hyaluronic acid, even more in particular, the production of that, so that we could drive a redensifying of the skin to improve its volume characteristics, if you will, to replump that skin. And so this was done like any one of our products you just saw from Fermiserum, multimodal mechanisms of action and technology to hit different biological vectors to get maximal results. Here we did the same, and we first employed our Z-Pro, which is an exclusive sericin protein that is actually cultivated from the spent cocoon of silkworms. So once they leave their cocoon and go on to become adults, they leave behind the sericin protein, which actually mimics a protein sequence that we have in human skin that can drive collagen and hyaluronic acid production. What we also know from the various practitioners we talk on a worldwide basis is that it's not just patients, it's humans in general in today's world want immediate gratification. And in some cases, you can deliver immediate gratification, doing something like restoring anchoring fibril system and lifting the skin back and restoring that is not something that's going to happen overnight. You saw that from the data out to 12 weeks. But in the case of some of the type of effects you want to have on skin, there are areas where you may be able to provide a more immediate onset of benefit. And that's exactly what we hope to do here when we were trying to soften some of the deep, coarse wrinkles that exist in the skin, as well as fine lines, while other technologies were working behind it to cumulatively restore the skin health. Specifically, I'm referring to dipeptide diaminobutyryl benzylamide diacetate, which mimics an amino acid sequence of something known as Waglerin-1. Waglerin-1 is actually part, and it's related to the image to the right of that scary-looking snake. That is actually a pit viper. It's considered one of the most venomous snakes on the planet. And what has been found through research by biologists is that their venom has a specific constituent in it known as Waglerin-1, which is the primary component of its venom that basically paralyzes its prey before they consume them. And there is a biotechnology company in France that was actually able to synthetically mimic the exact amino acid sequence of that Waglerin-1, which blocks specifically the sodium ion channels to relax muscles. So Botox, as we know, basically works by a paralysis phenomenon somewhat similar to this. And this certainly is not Botox in a bottle, as some people might interpret my statement. But what it does is it does have an effect like that, and a transient effect like that, where you can see a rapid onset of results so the patients can feel they're getting some immediate gratification, while things like the zeosericin protein are working on a more cumulative basis to drive that revolumizing of that hollow skin. But the sericin protein alone would not be able to drive all of the activity needed to do that. And so we use a combination of enzymatically and plant-derived growth factors. And one of them, in particular, the enzymatically, is something we call DAGP, or disodium acetylglucosamine phosphate. Disodium acetylglucosamine phosphate is just a simple derivative of N-acetylglucosamine 6-phosphate, NAG6P. If anybody was looking into NAG6P, it's a natural constituent in the skin that actually drives hyaluronic acid synthesis and increases fibroblast activity to do so. And so by modifying a NAG6P by adding a disodium group to it makes it readily soluble and more readily biodeliverable than NAG6P would be. But as soon as the disodium acetylglucosamine phosphate enters the skin, that disodium group cleaves off, and now you have bioactive NAG6P that serves as the real growth factor that's driving that fibroblast activity and the increased hyaluronic acid synthesis. So that's more of what I call a direct pathway, where you're inducing a cellular activity through stimulation to boost its output of something. There are also, in many growth factors, the indirect pathway, and a lot of times that's called as messenger signaling, transduction signaling. People use different terms sometimes in the medical or scientific community. But simply, what this does is this Lactobacillus panax ginseng filtrate has bioactive constituents that allows it to trigger the expression of transforming growth factor beta 1 in dermal fibroblasts. That TGFB1 is a signaler to those dermal fibroblasts to increase type 1 collagen synthesis in particular. So when you have that type 1 collagen synthesis combined with other forms of collagen and hyaluronic acid production from the sericin protein, and further hyaluronic acid synthesis from the enzymatic growth factor, you now get that cumulative effect over time that's building all of the extracellular matrix fiber and GAG materials, glycosaminoglycans, of course, which hyaluronic acid is GAG, the primary GAG in the skin, to holistically address that volumizing effect. To understand our exclusive Z-Pro just a little bit better, as I said, it's been proven actually to upregulate hyaluronic acid as quickly as just 48 hours. So you start seeing a quick onset of that benefit. But again, it has to be cumulative. But it's very important to note that at the same time, you're triggering these collagen fibers. And these collagen fibers, as well as our elastin, have to be maintained in a hydrated environment properly in the skin, or they become dry and brittle, resulting in the appearance of dry, wrinkled skin. So as people suffer from barrier function loss over time, what happens concurrently with that is collagen elastin isn't properly being maintained in a hydrated, static environment. And now you get secondary manifestation of them becoming dry and brittle. And then that whole structure begins to break down, and you start getting that hollowness and loss because of loss of density in the skin. The beauty of the Z-Pro technology is it's not only a stimulator, it's also a stabilizer, because it was also been shown to inhibit what's known as hyaluronidase, which is a destructive enzyme hyaluronic acid. So you've just gone through this arduous process of trying to boost that hyaluronic acid production, and now you want to maintain it. So the way to do that is by inhibiting this destructive enzyme, so that the results you work so hard to get are sustainable. I mentioned earlier and emphasized molecular size or molecular weight. There's sort of a standard accepted rule among medical, dermatology, scientific community known as the 500 Dalton rule. And this is documented in many medical journals that, all topical drugs or cosmeceutical actives should be below 500 Daltons. Ideally, you have a little bit of movement in that. As you saw, our biomimetic peptide is 554 Daltons. That's a really negligible difference from 500 and won't inhibit its ability to biodeliver. But something like this sericin protein we have is massive. It's much larger than those from a molecular weight standpoint, which means that without a proper advanced biodelivery system, it would just sit on the surface of skin, never penetrate, never become bioactive. So in the case of this technology, it is impregnated actually into a multilamellar vesicle, as you can see in the illustration to the left at the upper portion of that. And that multilamellar vesicle is basically multiple shells around something that's bioactive inside of it that's made up of these phospholipid bilayers. And what happens is if you have something that's too large, what you want to do is you impregnate something like a large protein. And if you look at the image to the right, that's what you're seeing is an electron microscope image of the Z-Pro technology. And in the center of it, what you'll see is wound in there, like a circle, is the protein. And then you're seeing those multilamellar vesicles on the outside, which are predominantly made of phospholipids, as the text below shows. Why that's important is because our skin's extracellular matrix is loaded with lipid fractions, free fatty acids, etc. But one of the most predominant ones in there is phospholipids. So as soon as that multilamellar vesicle carrying that protein gets into the viable epidermis, ECM, that phospholipid multilamellar vesicle is going to begin to be solubilized, and then it's going to release that protein inside, and now it's been biodelivered into the skin effectively. So the clinical evidence in this case was a protocol where we had 40 females, ages 40 plus, over a 12-week usage 2 times daily, with moderate severe presence of decreased firmness, coarse wrinkling, fine lines, and dry skin. The first measure we had, this will go back again to what we talked about earlier of how we modeled these studies. And again, we only had a cleanser, the growth factor serum, and a sunscreen involved in that study design. So we have hydration, which is a corneometer. Corneometer is an instrument that measures the amount of moisture in the skin through electrical capacitance. So as I've always said to people is, you know, last thing you'd ever want to do is touch a live electrical wire while you're standing in a large puddle. It's likely you could actually die from the amount of electrical shock that you would receive. But if you're standing on dry ground, that shock will be much less because water is a great conductor of electricity. So that has been harnessed in instrumental measures to check the exact same type of condition in the skin's hydration through its ability to transmit electricity. And as you can see here, we had a very significant improvement in that skin hydration, which is going to be a direct result of the increased GAG stimulation. And by 12 weeks, we were approaching 41% improvement versus baseline, with an average of 80% of subjects showing improvement over the course of 12 weeks. There are multiple instrumental measures that were included in the study. For the sake of brevity and time for all of you today, I didn't go over them all in great detail, but I think the most important thing that I'm about to show you is the image that's now in front of you, which is for many, many years, even early in my career, 35 plus years ago, and for many of the medical practitioners who may be viewing this at some point in time will understand is that histology had always been a best practice for looking at structural changes in the skin, and they were a great practice. They're just very, very difficult and tedious to do, and really the only way you could do them is to get post-treatment biopsy punches from the clinical panelists. And there's really 2 issues with that today. Number one is most panelists, when you're treating a facial, doing a facial treatment clinical, don't really want to have biopsy punches taken out of their cheeks or their foreheads or their jowls. They hurt, first of all, and they're concerned about potential visible scarring, etc. And like what's going on in many clinical practices today, the community in aesthetics has transitioned to a variety of minimally invasive or non-invasive treatment modalities because they're preferred routes. They're preferred by the patient, they're preferred by the practitioner. Some of them have even showed better results than some of those old invasive measures. This is no different how clinical modeling is being done because advancements in things like high-resolution ultrasound will allow you to send waves of sound into the skin through a non-histological measure that gives you the same information on epidermal and dermal structural changes. So this here is not our product being tested. This is just a baseline imaging for everybody to understand what these visuals show you as a result of using high-resolution ultrasound. So you actually would get a brochure with this if you decide to buy one of these instruments, and it shows you how to measure. And so what you're looking at the far left is you're just looking at a basic image of what an epidermis, the dermis, and a hypodermis should look like. And what you really want to see in healthy skin is no black. Black means that the sound is not seeing anything and passing right by it. It's not bouncing anything back to the detector. That means there's nothing there to see. That's a major problem. As skin ages, those become more prevalent. Ideally, what you want to see is very bright colors, yellow, reds, bright white, as you see in some of this picture here, particularly in the epidermis, where you have a very compact skin structure. When you look to the right now, you'll see a good example of what aged or damaged skin looks like when people first come in. So if you focus on column 1, this is just an example where, again, they're delineating the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis, as you can see with the arrows here. And you're seeing in the first picture, day 0, very dramatically damaged and aged skin. So you're seeing the epidermis is very disorganized, it's incomplete. You've got massive amounts of black in the dermis area, not very bright coloration, which means there's not a lot of activity taking place there as far as cellular regenerative effects. And whatever treatment was used for this illustration, by 2 months, or day 56 to be specific, you can see dramatic improvements where the epidermis has now become more reorganized and more available, if you will, or present, where it wasn't at day 0 above, by the bright white that you see continuous there. But you also see, most important, a lot of these bright colors, and those yellows and those reds are new fibrous materials and gags that are migrating from the lower level of the dermis towards the surface of the skin, which is what happens normally in skin. As the regenerative effect takes place, you get cellular production of fibrous materials and gags at the lower level of the dermis, and then they migrate their way eventually up towards the epidermis, and it's a constantly ongoing cycle. So you just have another illustration of the same phenomenon to the right of a second volunteer, number 2, where you see that similar phenomenon. The only difference is at day 56, you're seeing a lot of cellular activity down at the base of the dermis, moving its way up towards the epidermis. So if you keep that in mind as a reference point, you'll now see what we saw when we exposed growth factor serum over 4 and 12 weeks, 2 times daily usage, on people that had moderate severe issues of lacking skin density. So a perfect example is this is subject number 2, and you can see that the epidermis was almost gone. And the dermis has massive areas of black with just nothing present. And you don't have a lot of cellular activity taking place with regenerative materials being produced and being migrating towards the epidermis. So it's very important here. If you look at week 4, you can see that the technologies and our biodelivery system are clearly working at reaching that area of the dermis, dermis epidermal junction as well, to drive that productive activity, and more material through those bright colorations are being produced that are going to begin moving their way to the epidermis. And you also see a lot more green underneath the epidermis, meaning that material has already been produced by week 4 and is already migrating and redensifying the skin in that area. And then, of course, at week 12, you see an even much more heightened evolution of those productive capacities, and much more material making its way towards the epidermis, basically eliminating most of that black area that you saw at baseline. Obviously, this would tell you that with continued use of this product after 12 weeks, you would eventually see complete elimination of any of those black areas. You'll also notice that even by week 4, most of the epidermis reached a restructured condition. So that's a very quick onset of results. Frankly, we never expected going into this that we'd see those kind of results that quickly. It was a very profound learning. We were very pleased to see that. And you'll see the same thing again with subject 7, and particularly at 12 weeks, but even at week 4, and look at the dramatic changes that took place in the productive capacity and how much that black void from baseline between the epidermis and the dermis is now filling in, and a good vast majority by week 12 is gone, and you've got a lot of bright coloration happening in the dermis, which means there's a lot of biological production activity and fibrous and gag material being produced. We saw this across every subject that was in the study to similar degrees. So I'm sure you'll be happy to know that I'm not taking you through 40 plus of these images today, but I can assure you that if we took you through that file, you can see that on every one of the panelists that were in this study. Then you have the visuals. Folks always want to see the visuals of how that translates outwardly, and now you can see what those images from the ultrasound demonstrate as it relates to the high-resolution imaging systems. And you've got a ton of fine lines and wrinkling in this panelist, in the cheek area, even up near the temple area, that virtually are gone. And those expression line areas, particularly in the periorbital area, are being diminished or being shortened. The depth of the crevices are being reduced. And so the product is doing exactly what we would want it to do, and the patient can see those benefits, which will give them the satisfaction that they're expecting from you when you prescribe this product to them. Exact same thing you'll see on subject 1 here that occurred. And you particularly see it not only in that cheek area, but look at the periorbital area, particularly those crow's feet area, where significantly elongated lines that go all the way back to the temple area have basically been eliminated now. And a lot of those in the area of the crevice of the eye have also been diminished substantially. I'm now going to move to our third and last product that we're going to highlight today, which is our wrinkle and texture repair. And this is a new generation of this product. This product has quite a history. It was actually originally launched in 2012. But one of the things that I always like to emphasize is that, the company is always relentlessly looking for the right new products to add and augment the portfolio of skin practitioners so they have all the tools that they wish for the different conditions that they need to address, or combination of conditions they need to address. But we are just as relentless at looking at our existing properties in our portfolio and asking ourselves, is there an opportunity to make them operate better? Wrinkle and texture repair is a perfect example of that, as you'll see in a moment. So I won't spend a lot of time on this because pretty much all of our viewers know what the problems are with skin aging, a delayed renewal process that leads to decrease in the collagen and hyaluronic acid production, and the regenerative and restorative components of the skin become less, and they're not being produced at the magnitude that they used to be in younger skin. This manifests into the degradation of that collagen network and the extracellular matrix. Collagen 1, fibronectin, all of these begin to slowly deteriorate, unable to be fully restored because of slowed production levels, and we get impaired dermal architecture, reduced cell function, delayed cellular renewal, suppressed HA synthesis to keep those fibers properly hydrated, not from bundling. So the solution here, we realized when we stepped back and saw the absolutely phenomenal results that we received with the firming serum, we asked ourselves, is there a place for Z-Core technology to enhance existing products in our portfolio? And the one property that was selected for that was the wrinkle and texture, because it was a logical translational research opportunity. Translational research, obviously translating a learning from one area to another. And when we considered what wrinkle and texture repair was originally envisioned to be, it was really a product that was a very aggressive treatment with high potency retinol that was going to drive the fibroblast to increase their collagen production, which retinol has been well documented to do by converting a retinoic acid and connecting with the retinoic acid receptor on the fibroblast to specifically drive that collagen and elastin production, by the way. But what we didn't have was an opportunity to be able to rebuild some of the structural components like the anchoring fibrils with wrinkle and texture repair. And this caused us to realize that Z-Core would be a perfect fit with wrinkle and texture repair to advance it to the next level of therapeutic opportunity. Because if we could restore the collagen, the fibronectin, and the hyaluronic acid to aid the reconstruction of the extracellular matrix, which we were doing already, now we could also combine it with Z-Core technology to start providing more structural integrity repair. And the reason that it fit very well with this is because specifically this product operates by a microemulsion delivery system, very commonly used in pharmaceutical topical delivery systems, which gives very rapid release and very quick penetration of the bioactive constituent contained in said microemulsion delivery systems. In our case, it was retinol. And you get that accelerated penetration to deeper layers of skin. The Z-Core has to work at those deeper layers, so it made much more sense to do that. And a good way that I delineate this for people is if you look at our intraretinal night repair, for example. Intraretinal night repair is intended to release its retinol payload at the very upper surface of the skin to drive a desquamation phenomenon that induces very significant exfoliation effects. The wrinkle and texture repair was completely different in the microemulsion to go deeper to drive more of a stimulation effect at that deeper level for regenerative properties. So before I go further with this, one of the first questions that many people may ask is, well, if you've got this Z-Core technology now combined here, why do we need the Fermium serum? Now, there's a very good reason for that. And the good reason for that is because the wrinkle and texture repair is a very aggressive product. So when you have people come in with very severe photo damage, very severe signs of intrinsic aging, probably the first product that you're going to consider going after is wrinkle and texture repair. But as we know, with any retinol therapy, aggressive retinol therapy, you will have certain patients who will acclimate. So initially, they'll see potentially some significant acute inflammation, redness. They may have everything from itching, burning, stinging, tingling, and they'll acclimate, and those will become suppressed. There are some people who don't acclimate and have to power through the treatment to basically get to their skin ideal where they wish to be. But then you have a whole separate group of people who are pregnant, lactating, true clinical sensitive skin people who you can't or should not prescribe these kind of aggressive retinol treatments. So now you have Fermium serum as an alternative. Growth factor serum would be another alternative if you wanted to, look at redensifying the skin. But more so is wrinkle and texture repair. These are the kind of things that you would start a patient on. But once they start to achieve their ideal or see significant improvements, there's no reason you couldn't transition them off of that into something like a Fermium serum, a growth factor serum, or a combination thereof, again, depending on what conditional state you're dealing with that particular patient. So this, again, goes back to having all the tools in the toolbox that one needs on demand, and that's what ZO is about, is being a full portfolio offering so that they have all the tools that they need in their practice to deal with the varying different conditions that they encounter on a patient-by-patient basis. So what the prior 2012 basis of wrinkle and texture repair was the 0.5% retinol combined with Z-Pro to the far right that we've already discussed how they function. But then combining it with the Z-Core peptide and yellow sweet clover, because essentially now what's happening is the retinol and the Z-Pro are going to provide the benefit the sodium DNA did, which is that base cement of the bridge. But the Z-Core will now address the other two components of the horizontal iron plates and the vertical pillars. So now you actually get a restructuring and a lifting and a tightening effect from wrinkle and texture repair that you never could before. So the clinical results that we found was, again, a comprehensive 12-week clinical study of 43 participants. Again, all had moderate to severe conditions of lines, wrinkles, textural issues, and barrier function issues, which is associated with reduced hydration levels. The metrics that we looked at are, again, as I mentioned earlier, 2, 4, 8, and 12 weeks. We looked at instrumental measures, an indicator of improved barrier function, which is almost globally accepted as the best practice, is looking at transepithermal water loss, which is a direct indicator of impaired barrier function, or reciprocal, the improvement of it as you measure it over time. The expert grading, subject self-assessments, and then, of course, the digital imaging. The one caveat here, again, notice the same discussion we had earlier about the product usage. A gentle cleanser, broad spectrum SPF 50 aren't going to address any of those issues, but wrinkle and texture repair in theory certainly should. But back to the very aggressiveness of the treatment, some people find that they have to have something like our hydrating cream to soothe that irritation that they get, particularly early on, until they acclimate, or those who don't over the period of time. We specifically addressed hydrating cream because hydrating cream is not designed or contain any technology basis that would drive those kind of benefits of restructuring, anchoring fibril systems, driving collagenesis, et cetera, gag stimulation. That's not its central function. So it was provided to panelists for use on an as-needed basis. The feedback from the clinical side is it wasn't used as prevalently as we thought it would. So we have a very clean read from this protocol design of the wrinkle and texture repair and its absolute benefits it's going to deliver. You'll even notice here that in the initiation phase in week 1, the wrinkle texture is only recommended every other day in the PM, and then it's recommended in the AM and the PM by the time you get to weeks 8 and 12, and this is all part of that acclimation period. Again, it's representative of the aggressiveness of that kind of treatment, the aggressiveness that you don't get from a reactionary standpoint of redness, the sensory tingling, stinging, whatever that you would not get from something like growth factor serum or the firming serum. So what did we see in our clinical outcomes? Our clinical outcomes on lines and wrinkles was very dramatic. 98% of subjects showing improvement in crow's feet, global facial lines by week 12. 53% reduction in crow's feet and a 47% reduction in global facial lines by week 12. You can see here in this imaging is a really good example, and we have many of these, of course, but again, for sake of brevity, I select only those that I think could give you a good demonstration of what exactly we're trying to convey the benefits are here. So if you look particularly, again, in the crow's feet area and that expression line area, you see a very substantial diminishment in this patient, but also in the cheek area, particularly there to the right of each photo, you'll see a couple demarcated pigmentation marks. One of them, the furthest back in the photo, is actually gone, and that's all because of that texture repair. You've basically blown off that accumulated pigment in the keratinocytes at the very surface of the skin, fully develops the melanin, and you've also got a dramatic reduction in all of those fine lines that have basically been eliminated in that area of the entire cheek. You start to see the example of now what you would get from anchoring fibril restoration, et cetera. So when you look at the deep crevices in the forehead, I mean, many times things like this have to be treated with injectables or different kinds of treatment therapies, Botox, et cetera. And what you're seeing here, particularly in the center of the forehead, you're basically seeing a popping up of those deep crevices to make them less deep through that restructuring of the scaffolding system that occurs. So I felt that these two images give you a very different view of the different mechanisms, actions, and pathways that are taking place to now make our newest generation of wrinkle and texture repair a more holistic treatment option, and that you can then start seeing a broader portfolio of benefits for your patients and of course then transition them over to things like growth factor serum, firming serum, or combinations thereof after a period of months when you achieve their ideals, depending on the rate of every patient, the severity, and when they achieve their point of an ideal. Texture, we saw a very substantial improvement in texture by week 12, and I show that as just an additional measure that demonstrates or validates, I should say, what you saw from some of the prior images. And here again is another image that demonstrates the dramatic effects that you can get in a couple different areas. Notice the pigmentary changes that took place in the cheek on this particular panelist. Almost looked like a jaundice colored yellowish in that cheek area that was completely eliminated through the retexturing benefit of wrinkle and texture repair, but also notice the number and the magnitude of those deep crevices in the cheek area that now have been addressed by the improved structural integrity through the combination of the retinol RZ Pro technology and the Z Core technology in combination. I found this to be one of the most dramatic images I've seen in many, many years as a clinical outcome. 95% of subjects showed significant improvement in skin barrier function by week 12 as measured by the 2-meter. So we definitely achieved our intended objective of restoring barrier function. Very, very important, because by restoring that barrier function, the skin's ability to retain its hydration levels has been improved, which means now all the work that's taking place to restore that fibril system, collagen, elastin, and the various elements of the anchoring fibril system can now stay properly hydrated, so you don't have a vicious circle of them beginning to deteriorate and collapse again. Back to the progressional profile I talked about earlier, I just thought this was another good illustration to show how you begin to see the onset of that barrier function improvement in 2 weeks, but it continues to escalate with every next incremental period that we measured. So this is ideally what you want to see. And in virtually every one of our clinical studies, of every one of the products I showed you before, whether it be cutometer for firming, whether it be cutometer for elasticity, whether it be clinical grading, even self-assessments, you continue to see when you graph the data, these escalating improvements over time, and they seem to do it commensurate with each other. So there's a very strong alignment which validates your conclusions as opposed to drawing your conclusions based on one metric, which is always a limiting approach that can lead to misguided conclusions. Self-assessment outcomes were very profound. So this is the final box being checked. We found that 95% of subjects actually felt their skin felt significantly smoother by week 8. And all of these, when I say significant, it's significance the 95% confidence interval. So anybody that knows statistics knows that those kind of confidence intervals are typically done on things like drug trials, et cetera. So only 5% of chance that the data is chance. That gives you a very high degree of confidence that what you're reading is actually what the results would indicate. So what's interesting, I think, most about this information is notice that all of these subjects said this by week 8. So you continue to see their great responses by week 12, but it just says that by week 8, this product is working quite quickly to get people to a substantial level of improvement. And that's very important in a clinical practice, as we've heard from all our practicing partners worldwide. Is the quicker you can start seeing the onset of results, the more satisfied they are and the more confident they are in the protocol regimens that you're assigning them to. So now, one of the key things that we like to coalesce all of that together to understand is why we have these different products or different tools for the practitioner's toolbox. And it's based on something we've heard for close to a decade. I can tell you that I've been with Zeo Skin Health from practitioners everywhere around the world that I've spoken to, is that, I have to have the right tool for the right job. And so so this is what we've endeavored to do exactly through our anti-aging solutions, is to provide all the tools necessary, because, if you look to the far left, you have patients sometimes coming with expression lines in the forehead and eye area. They have loss of density and the plumpness and fullness. They have dullness and dryness. And this is all based on collagen and elastin production slowdowns, fewer fibroblasts that leads to the weakened DEJ. That's why I mentioned earlier why it's important to cause fibroblast proliferation, not just upregulate the production of the existing fibroblasts that may still exist and be alive in aged skin. And so this all causes decline in skin's regenerative processes. But then you have people that come in with deep wrinkles and frown lines. They have droopy cheeks. They have loss of elasticity, rough texture, and age spots, which are caused by these various manifestations listed below, including hormonal changes. And then you have people with very pronounced wrinkles and sagging skin and jowls that are almost candidates for something like plastic surgery, and loss of facial shape and contour, and different levels of pigmentation caused by various manifestations. So you have a whole spectrum of skin aging issues that you have to address as a practitioner. So what's the best way to do that? Best way to do that is concomitant therapy, if, I underscore, needed. So if you have a patient that comes in and has an issue with expression lines, it has hollowness in the cheeks, okay, your immediate reaction should be to go to growth factor serum. But if they also have skin sagging and laxity issues and loss of facial contour, then you're going to want to use firming serum. If they have both, or all of these issues, I should say, then you would use a combination thereof, because they're designed for very different end benefits. Now, if you had a person that came in that had all of those issues, but also had textural issues, okay, and a lot of deep, coarse wrinkling and fine lines, etc., and barrier function issues, then you're going to want to combine all three of these products with them. You might be able to modulate early on between the growth factor or the wrinkle and texture repair, likely starting with the wrinkle and texture repair as the most aggressive treatment, and then transition over the growth factor serum and combine that with the firming serum to continue to improve, but also to maintain the results you just worked so aggressively to achieve. But now if you get into a place where you have the sagging and the laxity and facial contour structural issues, you would certainly want the firming serum. But you have them that also have these issues with barrier function and with significant textural issues and still have some signs of lines and wrinkles. And ideally, you would like to combine the firming serum with the wrinkle and texture repair. So this is a perfect example of that, modulating the therapeutic approach and modifying it over a period of time, as the center column shows, depending on the situation you're facing. We think at ZO this is a really great way to actually illustrate that further, and could be a great reference point for people to use in office, in that when you think about how to concomitantly merge the science with different kind of procedures, for example. So one of the things we're always looking to do that our customers ask of us is, how can you find a way to extend, improve, enhance in-office procedures through concomitant use with your products? And there's certainly a great opportunity to capitalize on that, and every practitioner should, because you're going to just provide better results and more longevity to those results in doing so. So you see, for example, the red box here, where you've got forehead lines, frown lines, drooping eyebrows, crow's feet, hollowing of the cheek, okay? You would probably go to injectable wrinkle reducers or epidermal chemical peels or fillers for plumping and fullness, depending on which one of those conditions you choose. But a perfect concomitant use product for that would be the growth factor serum, based on the benefit profile that you just saw. Now you have people that have skin textural changes in the middle box, and the lower box to the left talks about dermal chemical peels and ablative lasers that are probably one of the most common modalities used in the office services to deal with the skin textural changes. Well, the great connection with that is, once you've done those kind of procedures and you have full healing healing of the skin, depending on how aggressive that procedure was, you would subsequently go ahead with your wrinkle and texture repair, which would continue to drive that benefit profile and enhance the outcome. And then over a period of time, you'd be able to modulate them off of that gradual or that aggressive wrinkle and texture repair to something that may be more amenable to them for long-term use and milder, such as affirming serum or growth factor serum. Back to the left side of the slide, when you look at fillers are being used to improve contour and shape, infrared therapy as well, even ultrasound, but surgical facelifts are the most dramatic of those. So the obvious concomitant use products for that to enhance that procedure and extend the longevity of it would be our firming serum. So you can now see how you can make a perfect connection to how those different products would align with those different in-office or surgical procedures. And so this really just expands upon that, provides a great reference point again to talk about, what aesthetic procedures are being done exactly for what type of conditions. And then you have the product connection color-coded beneath. So wrinkle reducers and fillers for cheeks, tear troughs, growth factor serum, perfect for that. Whereas if you're dealing with fillers, for example, the nasolabial fold or the jawline area, and you're going to want to go ahead with firming serum. And as you go to the center of this, you can see where you might have the need for all three to be used in conjunction in some way, shape, or form, or to modulate even more specifically between the wrinkle and texture repair initially, and then a growth factor serum subsequently, when you can start to take them down off of the more aggressive treatment and wean them off of that over to another product that will continue to escalate the benefit profile, as well as make sure you maintain that benefit that you work so hard to achieve with time. Again, the most extreme being things like facelift, where you would obviously to the far right, we're looking at infrared, thermal, and ablative lasers. We're looking at facelift, surgical procedures, obviously depending on the combination of the situation you're facing with an existing patient, using the firming serum in conjunction with the wrinkle and texture repair would give you a more holistic benefit profile to deal with a patient who has those kind of specific conditions. So hopefully that gave everybody a very comprehensive look at the science and technology that is behind our aging solutions, anti-aging solutions, I should say. And I'm going to now transition to come back to you to wish you all a wonderful day again. I want to thank everybody for their time and attention. I hope you found it informative, and hopefully it gives you a clear vision of how these different products can be applied for different need states and the severity of those need states, and also be able to align them in conjunction with your different type of in-office procedures and services to maximize the overall benefit appeal of your patients. And if you have any questions for us, we will be more than happy to answer them to the best of our ability. And I wish everybody a safe and happy rest of your week and future. And thank you again for your time.